Captain Hook walked along the deck of his ship. He was happy. He'd captured most of the Indians and had the 3 darling children and all the lost boys. "Ready the plank and bring the boys up from the brig," he shouted to Smee. The pirate did as he was told and brought the boys up on deck. He bound their legs together with chains, locking them with a brass lock. "All right, boys," Hook said. "You can join me and be my crew, or you can die. You first, John. What will it be?" John drew himself up tall. "We'll not die. I say Peter Pan will save us." Hook let out a long, cruel laugh. "By this time," he told them, "Peter is lying dead, all alone in his great big bed." "You liar!" Michael shouted. He tried to run to strike Hook, but the chain pulled tighter around his legs. He fell to the deck with a thud. Hook laughed again. He ordered John to walk the plank. John stood at the edge of the plank but would not walk on it. Hook grew angry. "Bring up Wendy," he shouted. Smee and the pirates pulled Wendy up on deck. They tied her to the mast. Her shoulders began to shake. Hook thought she must be cold. He decided to have a bit of fun and pretended to be kind. So he ordered one of the pirates to fetch his very own cape and cover Wendy so that she would be warm. The boys tried to look brave for Wendy, but deep inside, they were scared. "Now, boys, what'll it be? Join me or walk the plank. If you refuse to do either, you will see Wendy die first." "No!" Michael screamed. The lost boys shook. Wendy stood very still. "Be brave," she whispered. Who do you see? Hook began to move toward Wendy. She took a deep breath. Michael and John gasped. Just as Hook reached Wendy, he heard a sound. Tick, 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 tick. Hook's eyes flashed open wide. His teeth began to chatter and his knees began to shake. "The crocodile!" he shouted. "Hide me! Hide me!" The pirates followed Hook down the gangway and deep into the hold of the ship. Within a few seconds, only the children were left on deck. The boys hopped to the side of the ship. They wanted to see the crocodile that had eaten Hook's hand. The crocodile was not there, but Peter Pan was. He sprang out of hiding. Peter was making a wonderful ticking noise. The boys wanted to shout to him, but Peter stopped them. "Quiet, boys," he said. "It's Hook or me this time. Don't spoil it now." The boys moved back and waited for Peter's order. Peter grabbed his sword. He climbed the side of the cabin and looked about. He could see a pirate coming toward him. "Ready now?" he whispered. "Here comes the first one." The pirate came up on deck. Peter jumped on him and struck him. John clasped his hands over the pirate's mouth to keep him quiet. The man fell forward. 4 of the lost boys caught him before he could hit the deck. When Peter waved his hands, the boys threw the pirate overboard. There was a splash, then silence. One by one, 5 more pirates came on deck. One by one, Peter and the boys threw them overboard. Soon, all was quiet. Peter slipped into Hook's cabin. Hook wasn't there. Peter found a large brass key. He quietly crept on deck and opened the lock on the boys' chains. He signaled the boys to find any weapons they could and to hide. Peter sprang to Wendy's side. He took the cape off her shoulders and cut the ropes that held her. He quietly told her to hide with the boys. When she was safely hidden, Peter covered himself with the cape and stood leaning against the mast. Then he took a deep breath and crowed as loudly as his voice could yell. "It's Peter Pan!" Hook screamed from down in the hold. The deck was empty. Only the caped figure could be seen. "Well, missy," one of the pirates said, "there's no one here but you now." "There's one," the caped figure said. "Who's that?" "Peter Pan, the Avenger," came the answer. Peter flung off his cape. The pirates fell back in surprise. "Down and at them!" Peter cried to the boys. In a moment, the ship was alive with a clash of swords. If the pirates had stayed together, they might have won, but they were not good fighters, and they were afraid of Peter Pan. They ran here and there, letting themselves be easy targets for the boys. Some of the pirates jumped overboard into the sea. Some tried to hide in dark corners, but John and Michael found them. At last the fighting stopped. But suddenly, Captain Hook himself came rushing onto the deck. His long, sharp sword flashed in his one good hand. The boys surrounded him at once. Hook swung his sword at one boy after another. Each boy jumped back just in time to miss its edge. Peter sprang into the middle of the fight. "This man is mine!" he cried. Peter swung his own sword about his head. The boys stepped back to watch him fight. Hook now stood face to face with Peter. Peter's eyes narrowed. He swung his sword slowly from side to side. Hook sneered and let loose his meanest laugh. Suddenly, he jabbed at Peter, but Peter jumped out of the way and flew to another part of the deck. Hook was angry. "Stay put!" he shouted. Now it was Peter's turn to laugh. He leaped down onto the deck, throwing Hook off balance. But Hook spun around and swung at Peter. Their swords clashed. The sound of metal hitting metal rang loud in the air. Peter laughed again, then swung his sword again at Hook. On and on they fought, each poking and jabbing and swinging his sword at the other. Once more Peter lunged at Hook, this time knocking the sword from Hook's hand. Peter smiled. "So, Hook, at last I have you at my mercy." Peter bowed low, kicked the sword close to Hook, and told him to pick it up. Hook sprang for the weapon, and the battle was on again. "I am youth! I am joy!" cried Peter. Hook fought as hard as he could, but Peter fluttered around him and always stayed just out of his reach. Again and again, Peter darted in and pricked Hook's arm or his leg. Hook knew that he could not fight much longer. Then Peter raised his sword and jumped through the air at Hook. Hook sprang to the bulwarks. "You won't have me today!" he shouted. Suddenly Hook leaped overboard into the sea. There was a splashing and a thrashing noise next to the ship. Hook screamed. Then all was silent. In a moment, a soft tick, 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 tick could be heard swimming away from the ship. "So," Peter said, "the crocodile has finally eaten all of Captain James Hook." John, Michael, the Lost Boys, and Wendy gathered around Peter, cheering. "All right," he said, "the ship is ours. Turn her about and head for home."